All right, good morning, agents. This is Kevin Lauren of the Director of Training and Marketing here at Alta Realty Group. And today we're going to be doing our third installment of the NAR changes to the form. And of course, we're going to be joined again by Lauren Nowak from the TC Advantage. So really important stuff. The last two were extremely informative and just really important stuff that we got to get down. And so if you didn't have a chance to watch those first two installments, you can go to our YouTube channel, of course, and I always send out the replays. So before we get into today's presentation, I'm going to bring Bill Seitz, corporate broker for Alta Realty Group, on the line. Good morning, Bill. How are you doing today?
I am doing well. Thank you, Kevin. You sound like you're getting better.
I'm almost there, buddy. Still under the weather, unfortunately. This is day 9, summer plague.
Yeah, the summer plague is an elusive one.
I don't know. Last time I was sick for 9 days, but this is no good.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear that you're on the mend here. Before we get started, I just want to welcome a couple agents that are checking Alta Realty Group out. I believe they're on this morning. So welcome Nathan Flood and Susan Gaz. We're really happy to have you guys here this morning. This will be, obviously, as Kevin said, an informative training, and one that we, are really taking seriously is the changes to the C.A.R forms and also the NAR updates with the lawsuit and the new protocol that we're going to be working off of in the coming days and weeks. Additionally, I wanted to also touch really quickly. I sent out the Broker Tuesday tip yesterday, and when we are dealing with leases, obviously a little bit different process than a normal transaction. There is no escrow. There is no third party handling money or fees or commissions. And a lot of times our clients are paying the leaseor directly with the first month's, last month's, or whatever the terms of the agreement are. And then we have obviously a little bit of a smaller file, but we need to obviously create a transaction still through SkySlope. We need to make sure that that happens right away, especially if you have a lease listing, and then make sure all your supporting documentation that is basically the list that we have in there that Lauren's kind of put together for our brokerage. And the biggest thing too is that we see sometimes agents don't understand that the money is being handled. Commissions absolutely have to be processed through the brokerage. Agents are not supposed to be handling commissions and then taking them. And then, what we're finding is that sometimes that's happening and we're going into the file and we can't track what's actually happening and what people are doing. And so it's a big no-no, especially with the DRE. It's actually a major no-no. So I just want to remind everyone, if you're doing a lease for somebody, a client, please make sure that the agent that is issuing the commission, they make out the check to Alta Realty Group. It's sent to our corporate office. You can give us a heads up, let us know it's coming. We'll process that within 24 hours. Usually it's not a big deal. But just a reminder for that, agents aren't supposed to be taking payments directly from the leaseor or leasee or whoever's paying the compensation. So just a reminder there, and excited to see what we have for Debbie's mortgage update and getting straight into this, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for that update. That's really important. We have to stay in compliance with the DRE at all times. Nobody wants any, the DRE coming after us. So let's all play by the rules, right? So let's bring Debbie Sacconi from Clearview Mortgage on the line. Good morning, Debbie. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm doing fantastic as usual. And so I'm just going to be really quick, and I'm going to start to do kind of a fun thing. But first, you probably have heard information online and in the news that rates are coming down. So today, and I think it's still going to go down by the end of today, maybe by the end of this week. But right now we are hovering over conventional loans and loan limits under 1,089,300, at least in Orange County and LA County and San Diego County. Some of your other counties may have a high balance or they may not have high balance. So when it goes into jumbo rates are in the high sixes. And so regular conventional interest rates are hovering around 6.5%. And FHA is hovering around 6%. We're really close to dipping under that 6% with FHA. I think that's fantastic. So the fun thing that I wanted to just really quickly go over, you guys are not in the lending business, so you may not know some of these things. This might even help you like get a deal. Maybe you told that person, oh man, you have to have 2 years employment history in order to get a loan. And I'm going to tell you that's not true. So many times, depending on the offer letter, we can do a loan and close the loan. I just did 2 in the last 2 months with just simply an offer letter, not even a pay stub. And so especially also people that are just getting out of college or any type of schooling, and just hop onto a job right away. They don't have 2-year history. Maybe they only have 1 month history. Again, they can not only get a loan, but we can also close their loan with just the offer letter. That is amazing. I bet you didn't know that, or maybe some of you did. Also, the other, if somebody is retired, but they're not tapping into their IRAs or their retirement income, we can actually do a loan. Let's say we need extra income. Maybe they want to keep a property in Oregon because they saw a property here that they really love, and they want to try to, handle both properties, maybe even turn their original property into a rental at some point. We can, and we need just maybe 500, 1,000, a couple thousand extra income, and they're not receiving that. But if they have an IRA or a retirement account, we can actually create additional income on paper without them receiving it. No receipt of that income, but just we can use it on paper. Also, just so you know, this just came out. For a lot of people want to keep their 3% or 2.5% interest rates that they got a few years ago, but they need extra money to maybe buy a home. And they want to tap into like a line of credit of some sort. They can get a fixed second that's 30-year fixed, 20-year fixed, or 15-year fixed. That rate is fixed, but the payments change as or recast or change as the balance gets paid down. The payment will be lower and lower as the payment goes down. That's unbelievable. And this is for a fixed loan. Yeah, each payment is principal and interest. And also within the first 3 months, let's say that they paid it down a lot and they need to reaccess that money again, they can reaccess that line of credit, that fixed line of credit for the first 3 years. That's pretty amazing, because some of the HELOCs out there are interest only. So people are not able to pay, or they'd have to add extra money to pay the principal down. And, so it's just a little bit different. This is totally fixed. So that's great. And then also, you know what? The last 3 loans that I've closed got appraisal waivers in our automated approval system when we ran it through. So a lot of times we're getting appraisal waivers, but if an appraisal is needed, we're getting them, like the appraisal will go out that day to do the inspection. And there's been several cases where, for me, where I got the appraisal that day or the next day. So appraisals are really fast right now. And also on a lot of transactions with 20% down or more, we are getting appraisal waivers. That is my update today.
That's a great update.
Debbie, you just covered a lot of territory in a very short time. That was awesome.
All right.
I want to just point out too, real quick, is the graphs on the board, real quick, Kevin. As you can see, we're trending downward. We've been right now, we're actually at probably the lowest the rates have been in the last 4 or 5 months. There is supposed to be some language out of the Federal Reserve in the next day or so. And I think what we're going to see is really how they're going to set the table for the end of the year now. So I think by next week, or at worst case, the following week, we're really going to have an idea of where rates are going to go. But I anticipate they're actually going to keep falling a little bit. So I think everyone's got to be ready to talk to your clients, let them know what's happening, be the expert within your circle, and let's go get it.
Absolutely. No, well said, Bill, because as these things change, that changes the dynamics for your buyers and sellers. So really, really important stuff to be able to convey to your clients. So we are going to change gears here, and we're going to bring on Lauren Nowak. And Lauren, of course, is the owner of the TC Advantage. She's also our compliance manager here at Alta Realty Group. So good morning, Lauren. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm doing well, thank you.
All right. Always a pleasure to have you. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I'm going to stop my screen share, and you can have the reins.
Yay. Okay. So, again, thank you so much for having me back. Today we're focusing on the new forms from the perspective of the buyer's agent. This is our third webinar together in a month, so I'm sure everybody is sick of me by now, but as you can imagine, if we would have crammed all of this into a single webinar, it would have been beyond overload. And
There
this
might have been
one,
some Harry Carey involved, right?
yeah, exactly. And yeah, and this last one is a little bit more involved even than the one from last week. So so yeah, let's get into it. Again, if you haven't had a chance to watch those two, you might see a little bit of a duplicate intro here, but a little bit more information about me. Again, my name is Lauren Nowak. I'm the owner operator of the TC Advantage. I'm licensed. I hold a C.A.R certification as a transaction coordinator and as a forms trainer. I've been in the real estate industry for a little over a decade at this point, and my team and I have processed over 3,500 transactions in that time. So it's safe to say we have seen it all. This is certainly the biggest evolution in the industry since I've been involved in it as far as processes, and it's kind of the biggest shakeup. The previous one, or maybe coming in second, was probably the change to the purchase agreement a year or two back when we shifted to the grid and all of that. Just visually, that was a big change, but the technical side of things, this is definitely the biggest. So our for today, our main focus is going to be on the changes to the buyer representation form. We're going to talk about the difference in terms when dealing with an exclusive agreement versus a non-exclusive agreement. There's a smaller, gentler version of the buyer representation agreement that we'll touch on, and then also a handful of the kind of buyer rep adjacent forms that you may come into contact with as well. And then if we have any time after that, then we'll open it up for questions about not just this, but kind of any of the previous webinars too. If you guys have questions about what you've been seeing. As always, I want to remind and show everybody where to find the exact forms that I'm talking about, as well as, again, really helpful guides and even recordings of trainings and the town halls that were had prior to this release. So again, if you go to car.org and you log in, you will get this pop-up window in the top right corner. If for some reason you close this out or they stop making this automatic, if you click here, it will take you directly to where we're going to go. But essentially, the long way to get there is up at the top under Transaction Center. You'll click on that. Then you'll click on Standard Forms. And for today or right now, you can click on NAR Settlement sort of dashboard of all things broker compensation. When you click on the forms hyperlink, this will take you here to not just a quick summary guide, but actually a hyperlink to the red line version of these changes. So it will pop open actually in red the elements that have been changed. This is a really great resource, not just for you as the agent to kind of see at a glance, you know, what some of those changes are, but as we get into it, one of the recommendations is actually sending your client blank copies of these before you meet with them and have your sort of official presentation. And this is always a good way to kind of highlight key changes for them as well. They always have these red line versions available as well. When you go to, go back one more here. Instead of going to the NAR settlement related forms, if you click on form revisions and new form releases, these go all the way back to really old versions. The red line versions aren't necessarily available in some of these older ones, but if you go back, I think as far as maybe June of last year, they'll still have some of those hyperlinks that you can also view, because some other forms haven't been updated since then either. So really great resource. But back to these NAR settlement forms. So you get those red line versions here, the training webinars, record town halls. I think there were 4 or 5 of them that had really great conversations, people asking questions in real time, getting great perspectives, suggestions for scripts, so on and so forth. Recordings of the live legal webinars. And then these are really great sort of 1 or 2 page guides on, there's a quick guide here on the listing agreement revisions. This tells you in 1 page, the key updates, really quickly, bullet points of the changes to know about the listing agreement. So again, if you don't have time for the presentation, at least get some form of information. And this is a really great resource. What should you be doing from the buyer side during this transition period? From the listing side, how about, you know, what do you need to know? Things like that. Great resource. Okay. And then finally, of course, feel free to use me as a resource as well, whether as our TC team together or not. I am always happy, just as a forms trainer, to answer any questions that I am legally allowed to, or if not, point you in the right direction of where to find the answer, whether that's blowing up whatever the best resource is for that. So let's see here. Let me get into the next thing. And I talked about this on the last webinar, and I want to repeat it again because it's really important to mention this change in vocabulary you're going to be seeing and will continue to see. So again, most of this is to make things easier for the consumer to digest and understand. For example, the shift in vernacular from talking about listing agents and selling agents to seller's agent and buyer's agent. And that change has been seen in the contracts for some time now, but out in the field, there's still a lot of references to the listing agent and the selling agent. And we really want to make sure that we're being clear and specific. Some of these vocabulary shifts are also to reframe conversations and stigma. The biggest change you're going to be seeing is in discussing compensation instead of using the word commission. These are compensation agreements, not commission agreements. There's that sort of stigma of money and greed associated with the term commission. So talking about compensation. Further still, there are terms with contractual implications that we so often see referenced incorrectly. Everybody knows what EMD stands for, earnest money deposit, right? But the contract actually doesn't even refer to it as EMD or even earnest money deposit. It's referred to in the contract as the initial deposit. And then, of course, my biggest pet peeve as a transaction coordinator and one of the biggest issues of ambiguity and liability that I see is agents mentioning an inspection contingency when there's actually no such thing. It's the investigation contingency. There is an element of the investigation contingency that touches on the physical inspection of the property. But when we see it in counteroffers or even in emails of agents, hey, can you get the inspection contingency removed, or the inspection contingency is due, they're using it in the same way they mean investigation contingency. So it seems pretty minor, but this not only lets others know you've actually read the contract and the documents that you're having your client sign, these legally binding documents. But under that risk management lens, the more specific you can be, the more protection you're going to provide for your clients and for you. Another one that we're going to encounter today is the urge to call this next form the buyer-broker agreement. It is actually the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. Calling it by its correct name is also going to help frame the conversation around it and clarify that yes, compensation will be discussed. This involves compensating the broker, but in the context of your agreement to represent the buyer and what all that entails and everything that you're going to be doing during this representation period to earn the compensation. Another helpful way to think of this agreement is that it's essentially the listing agreement equivalent for buyers. You wouldn't go hold a bunch of open houses for a potential seller in hopes that they would then let you list their house. You wouldn't be or a stager only to find out the seller then ended up signing their listing with another agent, right? So same idea here. This is to protect your value as the agent as much as it is to protect the buyer during this property search and escrow process. This should come at the very beginning in first conversations with your client before showing them any houses. Some other items to note about this form is that it's non-exclusive by default. There is a 3-month cap on the representation period. Agents are only allowed to receive the amount of compensation agreed to in this BRBC form, even if the seller's offering more. And in anticipation of this form being kind of referenced during the offer negotiation process, the compensation field has been actually duplicated on the last page to make it easier to sort of share that element with escrow or with the seller. So
Hey,
let's
Lauren.
dive into it deeper. Yeah, go ahead.
Just want to, because I just caught something I think is super important. If you get this form filled out, you have the conversation with your buyer, you say, hey, the compensation is, you agree with them, you're going to, do the representation for 2%. And then you find out that the property that they love, seller is willing to pay 2.5%. Well, you're capped at 2%.
Yeah. Yep.
That, definitely will go into your strategy on how you approach this form and how you're going to, basically get into your negotiations out into the basically real world of dealing with sellers and sellers agents. And so you really need to think that through on what your approach is going to be and how you're going to do this. As much as this is kind of like painful in my eyes, as far as we're making changes of how we normally do things, I actually, in a weird way, am kind of excited about the ability to negotiate. You know what I mean? And
Absolutely.
And use that skill set because you can actually, still get a lot of things done that you normally would have happen as we do things today. But you might have to just, strap on that negotiating hat and get creative and do things, but don't necessarily put yourself in a pigeonhole yourself into a smaller commission if you feel like you can negotiate something, that's a little bit better for yourself. So that's going to be the yin and yang here.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll get to that more too in the compensation schedule and kind of or the compensation section and talk about a couple of those elements more in depth too. So
Cool.
right at the beginning of this form, the obvious update is the shifting to the grid format, right? Again, this is just easier for everybody involved. I feel like I like the grid format, and so does everybody else. So this is the grid, same as the listing agreement, same as the purchase agreement. It's important to note right away, again, that this agreement is non-exclusive by default. That means that a buyer can have more than one of these going at a time. May the best agent win. Obviously, this was intentional to put the buyer at ease. The C.A.R Forms Committee didn't want buyers to be taken advantage of in this new era and immediately, sign into or enter into an exclusive agreement that they didn't understand, and agents that aren't really used to utilizing this form aren't really sure how to wield. So it's non-exclusive by default. Making the agreement exclusive just means what it implies, that the buyer will not enter into another representation agreement in conflict with this one. And that aspect is really important because there's the question of, well, maybe you have a buyer that is selling their home and they're looking to buy two properties. They're downsizing, right? Maybe they want to put one in an investment property or purchase a vacation home up in, Lake Arrowhead. And then they also want to get, maybe a condo down here by the beach. And so maybe they have an exclusive agreement with an agent up in Lake Arrowhead, and the parameters of that exclusive agreement are, vacation homes, so on and so forth. That's more specific for that area. And they have an exclusive agreement for this other agent, for down by the beach. Are those necessarily in conflict with each other? That's essentially up for debate, and hasn't necessarily been parsed out yet, because again, it's going to depend on how you fill out that section, which we'll get to here next. But keep that in mind, the differences between exclusive and non-exclusive. To make this agreement exclusive, you first have to check this box here in 2A2, and the buyer then must initial a separate paragraph on the last page of the agreement, which we'll get to later. But just know that this can be made exclusive. The next element is the representation period. There's a bill currently in California legislature that C.A.R assumes is going to pass and be signed into law, and that puts a 3-month cap on any representation agreements. So for attorneys representing you, not just, buyer representation agreements, it's any representation agreement in general. So C.A.R Forms Committee just wanted to kind of get ahead of that. There's also the same concern, again, about agents possibly taking advantage of buyers. Everybody knows that agent, and none of you guys are that agent, but they just wanted to address that and make that a non-issue. So please, please, please understand the words used. The cap is 3 months. It is not 90 days. Not all months are the same length. Please use a calendar if you're not sure, because you have to use specific dates. And if you're, we'll give the redheaded stepchild February. That would be 3 months. Don't calculate your 90 days, because you're going to end up voiding your agreement. You're going to go out further than actually 3 months. So please pay attention to the dates that you're doing it. There is a 3-month cap. Now, you can, of course, extend the representation period. That extension is also capped at 3 months for each extension. So you can extend it, but again, for 3 months at a time. The wording, again, the vocabulary is very specific here. Okay, this next section sets the general parameters and priorities for the property your buyer's looking for. The default on this form is a single-family residential property. Please read this section carefully as well, because you might see SFR there in a box next to it and check that box. But then you would actually be excluding single-family homes from the search and from the bigger protections and confinements of this representation agreement. Single-family home is already assumed, and that does include co-ops. So you can then go on to add more property types, but please know single family is already selected. Also important, I feel like I'm going to be saying that a lot today because all of this is important and I don't want you to get desensitized to this word, but again, maybe every time I say important, make a little note. Location. This is a section that must be filled out. You need a geographic area in order to have an enforceable agreement. Vagueness and ambiguity is not helpful here. And again, this could come into play when you're talking about, well, we have one exclusive agreement up in the mountains and one down by the beach, right? Like if we're being specific about the counties we're looking in, the cities we're looking in, be specific again to activate and constrain this representation agreement. Now, you could leave it at that, those parameters, or you could also check the box in section C here and incorporate this new BIPP form. And that helps you and the buyer get a bit more specific about what they're looking for. Again, this is an optional form, but it helps buyers be specific about what they do and don't want. And it's similar to the old BMI form, the buyer material issues, where the buyer has like this blank paragraph where they list out what's important to them in a property search. That was hardly ever used, I think, because of that reason, where it was like, well, I don't know what is or is not important. This is going to be a little bit more helpful because you can see here, it's a little bit more detailed. Also, you can have multiple versions of this form, which is great because your buyer wants and needs, they may change over the representation period, and that's okay. So up at the top, you can see almost like counteroffers or repair requests, you can number them. And again, because this process is new for a lot of you, and you may not have yet the exact scripts or presentations dialed in, or any of that all worked out yet, this can help a lot in that discussion of like, well, I don't even know what to ask them what they're looking for. And you don't want to go down the list of possible MLS fields, but this is kind of a good general list of things to be considered. And then these terms and things that get selected and signed off on now also become part of that representation agreement of what your buyer Now, I just mentioned the old BMI form, and there's now a newer version of that. And this is intended for use on a specific property. So maybe the buyer isn't quite sure if this property is in the right school district, or maybe they want to get more information on the effects of the power lines down the street. Maybe they need missing roof tiles addressed, questions about easements, whatever. Paragraph 9E in the BRBC form, which that section on the grid references, says, for any property which the buyers made an offer on or are considering making an offer, the buyer will notify or update the broker in writing of any material issue to buyer for that property. Blah, blah, blah. If buyer does not provide such information for a property for which the buyer makes an offer, that property shall be deemed to satisfy the buyer's material considerations. Okay? So on and so forth. You all can read. Here's what that form looks like. Why is this helpful? So before the NAR settlement and the related changes to our industry, this probably would be considered kind of ridiculous. And I don't really know anybody that used this form very much. But in this new landscape we find ourselves in, with these representation agreements being required with every buyer, this means that the chances are much higher that you may find yourself in a situation where you have to defend the services provided to the buyer. You have to confirm that you found them a property that fit their parameters, and you may need this form to do that. So you may have filled out on that BIPP form some of the, more specific, but not a fully inclusive list of things. Then the buyer finds a specific property and they're like, gosh, we really, really love this property, but there's just this one thing. And that one thing is specific to that property, and it's not necessarily addressed on the representation agreement or the added form. the BIPP form. It's just specific to this one property. And then for whatever reason, the buyer cancels, they, maybe your representation agreement with them expires. And then, maybe they missed out on that offer, right? Maybe their offer wasn't accepted for that property. Then your representation agreement with them expires. Then that property, that escrow falls through and it goes back on the market. And the buyer goes and purchases that property. And you say, I'm, entitled to this compensation or something. Oh, but you didn't really help me find the property I was looking for. This wasn't part of that, agreement, or, this was different in some way. I don't know what the situation may be, but again, you may need something like this from your buyer in writing of what really is a specific issue with this specific property. Okay. Back to the BRBC. Section D in this grid gives a space to list any properties excluded from representation. This is the part where you have the conversation about any prior agreements with any other brokers or agents. It references paragraph 7 in the further text of the agreement. So let's take a look at that now. The goal is to increase transparency, right? And let the buyer know it's perfectly okay to have any prior agreements. Just give your agent a copy of what you've previously signed and then understand the implications associated with it. Let us know if you've signed any other representation agreements, whether exclusive or non-exclusive, right? If you've signed multiple non-exclusive agreements, let us know so we know that there are other non-exclusive agreements out there that we're, essentially competing against. But also give us the list. If that agent's already shown you properties, let us know which ones they've already shown you. One, so we don't also show them to you. And two, so that we understand that those already fall under the other agent's agreement, essentially. Let us know if that broker, again, has shown you any properties virtually or in person, if they've written an offer on your behalf, or otherwise acted on your behalf for such a property, because otherwise, letting this buyer know compensation may be owed to that broker. And if your agreement with that other broker was exclusive, you may owe compensation to that broker, whether they were involved in the property or not. And now we get to the good part. I think it's important to really read this first notice up at the top in gray to the buyer about compensation. The amount or rate of real estate commissions is not fixed by law. We all know that. They're set by each broker individually and may be negotiable between buyer and broker. So what that means is that it's okay to go into these conversations with your client with a set amount of compensation already defined, right? You can say, this is what I charge for my services. That is okay. You do not, for so long as the buyer's agent, you have been, without the regular use of these forms, have been at the mercy of whatever the listing broker is willing to share with you. And so that amount has fluctuated depending on whatever they want to offer. And this is an opportunity to know your value and to set your pricing or your compensation for the services that you're providing to a buyer. That section also references a buyer compensation advisory, which we'll touch on in a moment. So you can agree with the seller on an amount of compensation to be either a percentage of the price, or you can check the box and it would be a flat fee. Or you can also, same as in the listing agreement, attach a compensation schedule. The same way as the listing, right? It's if you negotiate, between $5,000 and $20,000 under the asking price, your compensation can be this amount, or, whatever set range of that. Find me, if you're able to get something, in this specific neighborhood that I really like, or if you're able to help me find something within a week or 30 days or whatever, those are all kind of examples of what a compensation schedule can look like. It's really, again, up to you how you want to set your business, structure your business, and present that to your client. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. The other thing to note is that if you are an agent that has your client, in this specific case, the buyer, pay the transaction coordinator fee or reimburse you for any other additional costs, that dollar amount would go into that added line. So you wouldn't input a percentage point or percentage amount and then check the box for a dollar amount to add the two together. This is an either or situation. So you would do a percentage amount and the dollar amount of the transaction coordinator fee, because essentially the way that this needs to be working legally and compliantly is that not that the buyer pays the TC directly. That should not go on a purchase agreement. That is not an agreement between the buyer and the transaction coordinator. If the buyer doesn't want to pay the transaction coordinator, the agent is still going to use the transaction coordinator. So this is not something like, oh, here's my, stager, or here's my photographer, or whatever. This is still a service that the agent is initiating and utilizing. So if you would like to have the buyer cover those fees, that amount needs to go to the broker in addition to the general compensation for the agent services. And it needs to be a specific dollar amount. It can't just be pay for the TC fee. It has to be a specific dollar amount.
Lauren,
Okay.
Lauren.
Yes.
So where
Sorry,
you have
that's a trigger point for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear on this. So on that 4B that's circled,
Correct.
if you're going to work off of say 2%, right?
Yes.
Right there, right where you got the arrow,
Yep.
2%.
Yep.
And then you want to you want to hopefully be able to negotiate the TC fee to be covered.
Correct.
Slide over right to the right.
Yep. Yep. So right here, you would put the dollar amount, for the TC fee.
Okay. But it doesn't have to be labeled, or it's just 2% and $500, for example. It's not, you don't have
Correct.
to put a label to it.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. So that's the layout of where that should go.
Okie dokie.
Okay. And so again, the 4B to that circle, that's the section further in the agreement that this specific paragraph of compensation references. So further into the agreement, this is the breakdown of what those terms also incorporate. We get one more time that notice that commission is negotiable. You can go into it and say, this is what I charge for my services, and then it is negotiable at that point. Again, you don't have to negotiate. You don't have to just take whatever the buyer says, right? Again, that's how negotiations work. So again, they put that again here. For non-exclusive representation agreements, compensation is only payable if there was broker involvement. But an exclusive agreement does not require any broker involvement. It then goes on to outline exactly what broker involvement means. It means either combination of any of the following: buyer physically entered and was shown the property by the broker. The broker showed the property to the buyer virtually. Not like, oh, here's a video or a 3D Matterport. No, like a FaceTime call, kind of video conference virtually showing them the property. That's fine. Broker submitted to seller a signed written offer from the buyer. Broker performed a market analysis related to the property or reviewed property-specific documents or disclosures with the buyer. Or the property was introduced to the buyer by the broker, whether that's like, hey, I have this off market in my office. They have this thing coming I heard about, whatever. Introduce them to this property. So any of those elements or combination of constitutes broker involvement. It does call out specifically too that just sending the buyer a list of properties doesn't count as broker involvement. You cannot set them up on automated emails in the MLS, sending them lists of things that become available and consider that broker involvement. Okay, another factor you need to consider when it comes to compensation, as Bill and I also touched on earlier, is the fact that the broker cannot receive any amount in excess of this agreement. So previously, if the buyer agreement was for 2% and the MLS is offering 2.5%, then the buyer's agent would get 2.5%. Not anymore. This is why it's really important to know your value as a buyer's agent and be able to articulate that to a buyer. Don't shortchange yourself or undervalue your services, because we have to think of this in a straight, narrow view. The seller is negotiating with their agent for payment of their services between them and the broker. The buyer is negotiating payment of services between them and their agent. We're not talking about, well, what about later on? No, right now, this is very singular. It's very linear. This is between you and the buyer for your services to them. This section also lets the buyer know that if the seller ends up paying the compensation, which is an option later, then that relieves the buyer of the obligation of this compensation. So first and foremost, this is an agreement for you to pay me. If the seller agrees to pay me later, you don't also have to pay me as well. This is not like a add-on kind of a thing. This will cover or cancel out, go towards the amount of your obligation. So furthermore, if, for example, which we'll touch on a little bit later too, but maybe you have an agreement with a representation agreement with the buyer for example, 3% compensation, and they find their dream home and the seller is only willing to offer 1% in concessions or compensation to the buyer's agent, right? So that's not, oh, now I have to modify this agreement. I'm only going to get 1%. No, you've already had this conversation with your buyer about your services being 3%. Now you get to go to the buyer and go, great news. Instead of 3%, now you're only obligated at 2%. And so the amount that the seller is paying goes towards what the buyer's obligation is, but it cannot exceed it. Okay. Next section is the continuation period. This is the same application that is in the listing agreement, and it basically entitles the broker to compensation for a period of time after the expiration of the agreement. And then paragraph 4C that it references goes into a little bit more detail, explaining that the right to that compensation past the expiration period requires that the broker delivers to the buyer a written notice of any properties where there was broker involvement before the expiration date. And then there is, of course, a form for that, which is that NBIP, which we'll touch on in a second here. But you don't have to use that form. It is an optional form. But keep in mind, if you're getting closer to the expiration period, if your client, you or your client don't want to extend it, or it's you've already decided that we're going to part ways, you need to know that if you have this continuation period filled out, because it is not a checkbox, right? There should be a number filled in there as it's not an opt-in term. Should fill this section out. So for whatever that amount is, if you want to be entitled to the compensation, if they end up moving forward or purchasing a property, it needs to be on a list that was provided to them before the agreement expired. Okay. Again, we'll get to that form in a second, and I'm going to skip over section F, talking about cancellation rights, and come back to it, because section G is still kind of in the realm of compensation. The default is that the buyer has 5 calendar days to deliver their personal or financial information to the broker or the agent. That typically is just your standard proof of funds and a lender letter, right? Either your pre-qual letter or your pre-qualification letter. Nobody wants their time wasted. And you need to get from your clients, the default here is 5 days, you can make it longer, their qualification paperwork, and you need to look it over to make sure that they are qualified to purchase a property. If your buyer is like, oh, I haven't even started talking to a lender yet, maybe you extend that date to like 7 days or 10 days or what have you. But the purpose of this term is also to protect your time because it's valuable. And this is an agreement between two parties, meaning you are going to do something for them, but they have things that they need to do for you as well. And this is one of those things, is provide this information to you. You can also check the box in this section to utilize another new form called the BFPI form. And this is the Buyer Financial and Personal Information form. And similar to that BIPP form that talks about the more specific that they want to be searching for, this goes into a little bit more detail about the buyer's financial options and details. We'll look at that in a second too. However, if that box is checked, the buyer also has that same amount of time, the 5-day default, to provide that form filled out as well. Okay. There's also an additional option in G2. If you have a buyer that can't afford your services, or maybe they're working with a loan product that won't allow for the payment of your services, that's totally fine. In that case, you would check one of those two boxes, and you can see both G1 and G2 reference paragraph 9B. And so we'll jump to that really quick here. Here's 9B. It's split up between 2 pages, so that's why it looks a little weird. This is part of the buyer obligations that I was just talking about. And it basically says that if either of those 2 boxes, right, either they can't pay or their loan product won't allow them to pay, if either of those 2 boxes are checked, then the buyer by default is agreeing that on any offers written that they make, that there is a term included for the seller to cover their compensation obligation. And that if the seller rejects that term, the buyer's broker has the right to essentially walk away. You're not obligated to work for free. If you submit an offer, the buyer cannot afford your services directly. You've looked at their financials. You have all the information. You see that they cannot compensate you for your services. You have to ask the seller. And the seller comes back and says, no, I'm not going to pay a buyer's agent. You as the agent should have already had this conversation with your client during this representation consultation, right? Like this shouldn't be a surprise. You have considered this scenario, and you have the option to say, okay, well, then here's your choice, buyer. You can move forward with this purchase, but you would be doing so as an unrepresented buyer. This representation agreement would essentially be suspended. I don't need to consult with you on these forms. I don't need to help you at all if they're like, this is my dream home, I can't let it go away, blah, blah, blah. Or you can say, you both can say, okay, well, that purchase this property unless they cover your compensation. I value your services. I respect your time. Let's find something else, right? Those are kind of your 2 options. Now, let's say the buyer says, this is my dream home. I have to have this home. I'm so sorry. I'm going to go forward unrepresented. And then they go forward unrepresented and they get an inspection and the property's a money pit. And they're like, oh my God, I got to get out of this. They can't cancel that transaction. This element of walking away is only property specific. When they cancel that transaction, they can go right back into having you show them properties, the parameters of this agreement, as long as it's within the representation period and hasn't expired yet, go back into effect. So again, you're not obligated to work for free. There are options. It's kind of the lesser of 2 evils. But I think it's just going to be about the conversations had beforehand and setting up the expectations of all parties. Sellers are going to learn real quick what kind of buyers you're going to get if they're unrepresented, and the pros and cons of working in those types of transactions. I think it's going to eventually balance itself out, but it's going to be bumpy for a while here. Okay, here's that BFPI form I mentioned. This is the buyer financial and personal information. As a best practice, the best practice would be that if the buyer checks either of those two boxes stating that they can't cover your compensation, you should also check this box to make this form part of the agreement as well. And you can see how it may help the buyer remember or realize maybe even potential avenues or funds that they hadn't considered. And it also gives you as the agent a much clearer picture of their qualifications as a buyer. Who is their lender? You would know right away of like who they're working with, what status of qualification they're at, what realistically they're looking for. You have something in writing from them saying, this is all of my information. It's a really helpful form for the agent and also for the buyer to kind of, again, give them some more insight into some of the financial options. This is also a really good form to include in a packet to your potential buyer clients. Like I mentioned before you actually sit down and meet with your buyer, send them a blank copy of the buyer representation agreement, send them this BFPI form, and then even send them a copy of the cancellation form, which we'll get to in a second. Just let them be prepared. These are the forms that we're going to be talking about. Is not, I'm going to try and, take advantage of you or get a lot of money from you, or no, here's what we're going to be talking about. Look it over, come to me with any of your questions or concerns. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Transparency is key. Okay. Now, speaking of that cancellation form, we're jumping back into section F on the buyer representation form. You can see there are two scenarios: non-exclusive and exclusive. If you have a non-exclusive agreement, which this is by default, cancellation is effective upon receipt of written notice. If it is an exclusive agreement, it's effective 30 days after receipt of written notice. So there's two different parameters based on whether or not the agreement is exclusive or non-exclusive. Again, this section references paragraph 5. So let's go into that a little bit more. It's not just as simple as signing a cancellation and then walking away. If you would like to still collect any compensation owed for properties where there was broker involvement, you must deliver a written list to the buyer within calendar days after the effective date. So remember, when we're talking about this thing expiring, you need to give them a written list of broker involved properties before the expiration date. And that can be one day before it expires. That's fine. If we're talking about cancellation, you have 5 days after the cancellation to deliver this list. For non-exclusive, right, it's 5 calendar days, but it's just 5 calendar days after that cancellation. But for exclusive agreements, because you have that 30 days for it to take effect, right, this is 5 calendar days after the effective date. So it would be 30 days plus 5 calendar days. Keep that in mind. Again, the term is specific, 5 calendar days. You can see here in section F, cancellation for the exclusive, cancellation effective 30 days after receipt. Is that calendar days? Is that, it's not business days? Is it, right? So be very careful with these numbers. Don't let things go up to the very end of the line. It is specific here in saying 5 calendar days. So we are counting weekends and holidays. They're calendar days.
Quick question on that, Lauren.
Yeah.
So, for example, you're in an exclusive agreement, you've been showing property, blah, 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 you've had no success.
Mm-hmm.
kind of getting tired of this client. You don't feel like they're gonna, they're not gonna perform as far as you know what I mean? You're just kind of like not sure they're gonna to get to the finish line. You're under the 3 months, right? You signed for 3 months exclusive. At 2.5 months, you're like, you know what? I just can't. It just is. I don't think this is going to work out. I need to move on to other greener pastures. You send out the cancellation, right?
Yeah.
Are you saying that it's 30 days from that receipt from the buyer, or you saying?
Well, it sounds like it would have expired prior. Yeah, I mean, it would expire before the cancellation takes effect in that case.
Okay.
So you would still, I mean, if you're the one canceling, you should deliver that list of properties with the cancellation, right? But sometimes, especially if you've given the cancellation form, so they don't have to go through that awkward thing of like, I want to cancel. Can you send me the form to cancel? Right? Like they feel empowered and comfortable with this agreement that can be intimidating and scary because they have that cancellation form. This gives you a little bit of window to kind of like, okay, let me get all of my stuff together and here's this list within 5 calendar days. But in the scenario that you were talking about, it sounded like it would and you just would choose to not renew it, essentially. That may be right. If it was an exclusive agreement.
What I can see here too, so important to keep written notes, not only, MLS printouts, but like dates, times, like the more you can be detailed, exactly what you did with this client is only going to protect you moving forward, because you don't know if some of these buyers they might be shopping you for, they get into these agreements, and especially non-exclusive, and they go, well, this agent's going to do it for this agent's going to do it for that, knowing that they're probably going to have to pick up part of the tab. You know what I mean? I can see where that's going to get a little bit tricky.
Yeah. And have a process for tracking the properties that you've shown to see, hey, we stopped working together and now this property's under contract. Who's the buyer? Who, like maybe after your expiration period or your cancellation period, and to kind of have to follow up. This is going to be definitely the biggest shift in the type of work that buyers agents are doing, and restructuring your systems and your workflows on how you're working with buyers. And again,
a private investigator.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, you're really going to have to have a system set up for these scenarios if you don't want to leave money on the table, because again, you should be valuing your work. I feel like buyers agents have been taken advantage of for so long of, running clients around and setting up all these showings and writing offer after offer after offer, and, and then for nothing to come of that. And your time is valuable and your work is valuable. And again, being able to articulate to your buyer of like, yeah, I'm not just a door opener. These are all of the systems. This is everything that we're doing, and making sure that we have this complete picture of, what we've looked at and what's met your needs and everything. I think that's just part of a service to a buyer. And I think that's something that buyers agents are going to, have to figure out how that's going to look in your business. Okay, so this is the second mention of providing a list to the buyers. So let's look at this NBIP form, or the Notice of Broker Involved Properties. It's optional. You can do a spreadsheet. You can do a manila folder with MLS printouts that your buyers initialed every time you showed them the property, like whatever. This is one of those options. It's really straightforward. You have the dates for the representation period on your agreement. Then you either list the properties in that space provided, or you can check a box to reference an attached list. Maybe you reference the list from your spreadsheet, whatever. Remember, and again, this here just has a big paragraph, but I think the best practice as Bill mentioned, would be, let's have the dates, let's track their feedback, let's track, like when they asked to see, or how it was found. Did I show it to them? Did they come to me? Did they, that would definitely be a better structure to have than just fill out list this really long paragraph. Also, remember, you can always add text longer than this field that's provided, and it will automatically generate a TOA, or a text overflow addendum. So don't also feel constrained by this paragraph. This would also be the form that then the buyers could turn around and give to a new broker that they decide to work with, or if they ever sign another agreement with. If you're giving them this form, then maybe they're going to go and sign another non-exclusive agreement. They could give this list to that other agent they're signing the agreement with, or you may receive a copy of this form when you sign another non-exclusive agreement with a buyer. This is the signature part of that form. So it's this text, and then right underneath it is this signature box. And this is really why I love the red line version of these, because you can really see the important stuff. The note to the buyer that once this form is delivered to the buyer, it is effective, even if they don't sign it. So if you're dealing with a pissy client, or it is not a friendly parting of ways, and the client's like, I'm not signing this. Cool, you don't have to. This list still counts. So make sure you're keeping accurate records of the properties that you're showing. Make sure you're keeping proper documentation of the conversations you're having. Make sure you get everything in writing from your client that you possibly can, because it's going to get worse before it gets better. And while we're going down the rabbit hole,
real
What,
quick,
say that
I'll
again?
add to that. I said, I will add to that. If you do not have a good resource and a good TC, for example, like Lauren here and her team, that are literally educating themselves, and on top of it, you're going to be at a severe disadvantage, because there's going to be questions, and naturally I'm here to help as well, but we're all learning this new stuff together, and you're going to want to surround yourself with the strongest team possible. If you do not have a strong team, or a strong TC, or somebody who has a good grasp of how this is evolving, you're going to be at a big disadvantage. I can only answer so many phone calls. I can only be in so many places at one time, and you might find yourself at a point where you can't get a hold of myself, or maybe your TCD doesn't know they have no idea how to execute this. So it's a really also, I think, a time to reevaluate your partnerships, the people that you work with, and really think through this. Do I have the strongest team possible? And because, like you said, it is going to be a little rocky. It's going to be a little bumpy. There's going to be some frustrations. And so I just think that you have to kind of look ahead and plan and say, okay, if I don't have a strong link around me that I'm using now just because I've been doing this forever, well, that's something you got to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and even from the perspective of the transaction coordinator lens, if you are, there's so much more work involved up front, essentially, now, right? Before you get into escrow. Imagine getting into escrow and now trying to deal with all of this, like, because you shouldn't be only doing, one escrow at a time, right? And then once that escrow closes, okay, now let's go look for new clients or new business, right? Like, you're constantly juggling both buyers and listings and in escrows and potential escrows and offers and all this stuff, right? So we're really adding to the front load part of work for agents. There's not too much here that your TC necessarily can do. You should be the one tracking showing the properties and the feedback and all that kind of stuff. And so you really want to lean on your strong TC team for when you're in escrow, that your things are getting taken care of. You're being notified of due dates and timelines, that your, documents are getting addressed and taken care of in a timely manner, because there is so much more that you really need to be focusing on before a file even gets into escrow. leverage your time out a little bit when you do finally get into escrow, so you can keep focusing on getting more things in escrow. So
No, that's great point. Efficiency is going to be key, and like we said, a strong team is going to be is really going to make a difference for the agents that'll thrive through this.
yeah. So okay, so now that we're going down this rabbit hole of worst case scenarios, let's look at the cancellation form, because there is a specific cancellation form for the buyer representation agreement. It allows for both unilateral and mutual cancellation. And then it also gives a few options for compensation after cancellation. So again, you have the two scenarios for the effective date based on if the agreement is exclusive or non-exclusive. And then you get a reminder that once this is effective, the broker is not, once it's canceled, even if this cancellation becomes effective and the buyer goes into escrow on a property that you were involved with, you are not obligated to then represent that buyer in that transaction. You can just collect the compensation. You are done. You are not the buyer's agent. The default of this form is that the broker will be entitled to compensation outlined. Again, like I mentioned, if the property on that list is purchased, the same as it is in the agreement, right? This is that could either from the list of broker involved properties, right? That's the default is as we've understood it this whole time. Or you can now check a box. And this is a theme that I'm sure you've been seeing. There are a lot of little check boxes that are going to have really big implications and pivots for your forms. So please be careful and pay attention to what is getting checked. You can check a box under E2, and that's going to modify it further. That modification is outlined on the next page in section 3. So if you check that box under E2, then section 3 comes into play, and you have some options to essentially select all that apply. Now, A is you don't have to use that notice of broker involved properties. You can list the involved properties here if you would like. If you're canceling within that 3-month period, you know, maybe you have a buyer that has had you show 50 to be a long list, but chances are you have a really picky buyer, or you know pretty quickly before showing them a ton of properties. So everything may fit in this section, maybe. You also have option to select reimbursement for any expenses incurred. Maybe you are like, look, the area that you're really keep gravitating towards, it's not my area of expertise. Let me set you up with a specialist at my office and I'll just collect a referral fee. You can do that. Maybe you just need to hand the buyer off to someone else. Maybe you just want to walk away and tell them, lose my number, don't contact me again. I don't want any compensation from you. I wash my hands, goodbye. You can also do that as well. And you can check any of these. These are not an and or. You can check multiple of these boxes. And then you have on that first page for the actual cancellation, this is similar to the cancellation of the purchase agreement in that their signatures required in 2 parts. The first page, either unilateral cancellation or if the broker is canceling, or if it's a mutual cancellation, then they would sign in that second box. Then if any of these boxes in section 3 are checked for adjusting any of that compensation, then you need signatures for that as well. So same in the purchase agreement, if you sign the cancellation, you sign it to cancel it. And then if there's any deposit into escrow, you sign again in that form talking about where the money goes essentially. Okay, so now we've touched on the 3 main areas that are affected by whether the agreement is non-exclusive or exclusive. So I want to recap them here. Non-exclusive is the default for the agreement. Cancellation is only if there's broker involvement, and cancellation of the agreement is effective upon receipt of signed cancellation or written notice of cancellation. Exclusive agreements have to have the opt-in box checked and need an additional separate section of the agreement initialed. The broker can receive compensation for any purchase during the representation period, regardless of involvement. And cancellation of the agreement takes place 30 days after receipt of the cancellation form. Further into the agreement, you have paragraph 8, which I wanted to bring to your attention. It can also be really helpful for agents that aren't sure or used to articulating their services or value to clients. This paragraph outlines what the broker will do for the buyer as their representative, essentially earning their compensation. It's anything from the obvious writing offers, negotiating terms, helping with escrow, to ordering inspections, scheduling appointments, giving the buyer a list of vendors or referrals for requested services. That is part of your job, part of the service that you're offering to the client. So this is just another perk of taking the time to actually read through these contracts. And this is finally the last page of the BRBC. And we see at the top in its own little box is the section the buyer needs to initial if they want to make the agreement exclusive. And this box outlines to them again, it means they cannot enter into another representation agreement in conflict with this agreement. It reminds them that the broker is entitled to compensation with or without any broker involvement from this point on, and that the cancellation of this agreement is effective 30 days after giving written notice. And then right below that box is the section that repeats the agreed upon compensation amount. So you can see how this would be really easy to provide just this last page to escrow or the seller instead of all 5 pages that may include other terms that could be a bit more sensitive. So there's a discussion about best practices of, do you just automatically include this page with the offers when you're asking for the compensation? You can. Technically, the seller's only entitled to this upon request, but as the listing agents, you should be requesting a copy of this. So it may just be best practice to just include this page with any of your offers as well, where you're asking seller to pay the buyer's broker. Come out with another option that's being explained as the little brother to the BRBC. This is non-exclusive only, and there is no option to make it exclusive. And that's mostly because it only applies to up to 3 properties for a max representation period of 30 days. You might want to use this with a tenant that's purchasing from their housing provider. Or maybe you've met someone through an open house and they're just looking in that neighborhood. They want to put an offer in on just that house and maybe 2 down the street or something. Or maybe you have a really anxious buyer that's afraid of commitment. Whatever the reason, this is an option that is available. Technically, it's 3 pages, but the last page just has signature lines at the top. So really the bulk of it is 2 pages compared to the 5-page BRBC form. And you can see at the top, it lets you list up to 3 properties. The grid is significantly smaller as well. You have the section for the representation period, not to exceed 30 days. You can also extend this for 30 days at a time as well. And the explaining of the cancellation effective period. You then have all of the same basic terms defining broker involvement, compensation, cancellation, agency, etc. But at the bottom of page 2 has this added box, and I'll blow that up for you. This is addressed to any unrepresented buyers and prospective buyers and lets them know in the case of being at an open house, right? In the last presentation, we talked about the open house non-disclosure agreement and sign-in sheet thing that it says, the agent holding the open house only represents the seller, so on and so forth. Okay. In the case of being at an open house, they are not required to sign this agreement in order to see the property. If you don't want the agent hosting the open house to represent you, don't sign this agreement. So this is meant to help the buyer if you have we'll give them the benefit of the doubt, a confused agent holding the open house that says, sure, I'll walk you through this open house, but sign this representation agreement first. Okay, that is not how this is going to go. And this lets the buyer know you don't need to do that in order to see this open house. Signed an agreement with another broker, tell this agent and know that if you don't, and if this is not done correctly, you may end up being obligated to pay 2 commissions. Okay, on the topic of compensation, we're going to touch on the BCA form. This was rolled out in the June release, but as of last week, it's been updated. It's now bundled with the BRBC and the listing agreement, so both sides are seeing the same information. And you can see how much is read because it went from 1 page to 2 pages. And it explains again that compensation is fully negotiable. And remember, this doesn't mean you have to negotiate either. Know your worth. This explains how there may be additional buyers, how the broker may represent both buyer and seller. Also lets the seller know that the buyer representation agreement, what the buyer representation agreements are that the buyer is working with. And it also gives a little backstory in the last paragraph about the changes to compensation and the MLS and kind of why we're doing things this way. So it's a really great form, similar to the market conditions advisory of like letting the other side know what they're working with and what they're encountering, what the seller's options are for paying compensation, what the buyer's options are for asking for the seller to pay for compensation, so on and so forth. Read that form. I think it will be really informative for you. Okay, so what if you already have a signed buyer representation agreement in place and it was signed prior to this updated version that came out last week? The co-op compensation fields in the MLS won't be removed until August 17th is the latest, but check with your MLS because it's different with every MLS. C.A.R. MLS is August 13th when they're going to be removing those fields. There is one, I think up north or maybe Central California. So it's really important that you know the date your MLS is going to be removing those fields because you need to use this DMBR form. Now, this form was released at the end of June, so it may have been bundled with any new buyer agreement signed since then. But for any version signed prior to that, you'll want to use this form. This discloses to the buyer the terms of the NAR settlement that caused MLS to remove any offers of compensation. Brokers anymore. It also notifies them that they're now solely responsible for the compensation of their agent unless another party, namely the seller, agrees to pay for it. And then it modifies that existing agreement to invalidate any terms referencing compensation from the seller's broker because it talks about, oh, well, this is the amount, that you're paying, but, your agent may receive compensation from the seller's broker, right? This is like, no, we're removing all of that terminology. That's not the case anymore. It also invalidates the term allowing the broker to keep any additional compensation offered that was more than what the agreement called for. So it's getting this in line with the new version. Also, the modification doesn't take effect until the MLS rules change. So make sure, again, you know the dates for your specific MLS, because if you go into escrow with your buyer and there is compensation still showing on the MLS, then that's valid, even if they've signed this form. The terms of this form do not take effect until those fields are removed. Okay, what if you need to actually modify the terms of the agreement? If you're coming up on the end of your 3-month period, right, and you need to extend the agreement, you would use this form, the MTBR. This is a modification of terms for the buyer representation agreement. Like the cancellation, this is specific to this agreement. The first term you can modify is the expiration date. That's probably going to be the most common. then there's another reminder that it can't be extended for more than 3 months at a time. There is also yet another notice that compensation is negotiable, and that is right above the section where you can modify the compensation. And I know what you're thinking. If I find out a seller's offering more in buyer agent compensation than in my agreement, I'll just modify it to match. Yes, you could technically do that, but one, it would have to be done prior to the offer being accepted or executed by both properties or parties. But imagine bringing that to your buyer and being like, hey, sign this so I can get more money. And then your buyer is going, well, we're already we're at the top of our budget. So if we get you more money, can we get a bigger credit? Like, will you credit that back to us? Right? Like, imagine having that conversation with them. That
Lauren,
would be a bit awkward. Yeah.
can you say that scenario one more time? Sorry, I wanted to hear that about
Yes.
change,
So
modifying the agreement once you find out that the seller is willing. Let's say a house is sitting on the market for 180 days, right? And now, the listing agent is like, hey, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller, we gotta incentivize. We need to do something to attract, get this thing sold. Agents are calling, having conversations. You call the listing agent now because there's no buyer field or compensation field, right? So you got to have these conversations over the phone or over text or whatever.
right.
Hey, we'll pay 3.5% or 3%. We can get this thing in escrow by the end of August, right? Now you were saying you're going back to your buyer agreement, and you had structured 2%, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now you're finding out the information that the seller is willing to pay you 3.5%, or that's in their mind, they're willing to pay 3.5%. That's their threshold. So run through that again. That's the scenario, right?
Right. So now you go to your buyer and you say, I would like to increase the amount of compensation, the seller on this property, which again, this has to be done before you've written an offer or any of that stuff. The seller said that they're willing to offer a concession amount or consider an offer where they will cover my compensation up to 3.5%. We only agreed to 2%. So I would like to increase that to 3.5% to match what this seller is offering. You can do that. If your buyer is like, cool, yeah, let's do that. Sure, this is the form you would utilize for that.
Okay. Well, that's good to know, in a sense. I mean, I don't think that, yes, there's some buyers that'll probably want to grab a piece of that, which whatever.
Sure.
But I think as long as you frame it in the right way, you probably can, have some upside in that scenario, which that may happen. I mean, I could see that happening.
Yes. The other thing to know is that this modification is not property specific. So if you modify it, you go in to write this offer and then you don't get the offer. Now, do you modify it back to the old amount and reduce it back down?
Oh my gosh. Oh boy. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's something to consider. Also too, if this is your buyer's dream home and you have an agreement for 3% and the seller is only offering 2% and the buyer cannot pay it at all, and you're like, okay, I will reduce it down from 3 to 2. You can do that here as well.
Well,
it's not just for increasing, you can also reduce it.
So from my perspective, or just real quick, from my perspective, just as a general concept, I would try to get that buyer compensation agreement, as high as you can, not obviously being ridiculous,
Right.
within what's customary or what's been traditionally maybe utilized, but that will make it easier on you than having to ping pong back and forth between this crap. If you can get, let's say 2.5%, written in the agreement, the seller's willing to pay 2.5% or 3%, and you give your buyer an extra 0.5%, well, bonus, you're going to look like a hero anyways. So, you know what I mean? I think it's really, important to define what you're okay with, what you're shooting for. And I also would frame it too, talking to your buyer, look, Mr. Mrs. Buyer, I am your advocate. I am going to do this, like you said, know your worth, know what you're doing. And look, my goal is to not have you pay a dime of my compensation, but this is the way the rules are work. This is the way we have to work within the new guidelines. My goal is to not have you pay anything, but this is what my compensation is, what I work for. And then you just got to frame it up. So, you know what I mean? And I listened to a CRMLS webinar about 2 months ago, and I actually talked about it before we kind of got this much deeper into this conversation. But their feeling was, yeah, maybe out of the gates, it's going to be a little bit, sellers might think they're going to, get away with not paying anything,
right?
and they're gonna have this
Yeah.
extra money. But the reality is 80+% of transactions are still going to have some sort of seller concession, compensation, however we want to frame it, into the equation. So I don't think it's a doom and gloom. It might be a little bit weird, like you said, a little rocky out of the gates, but the seller's not going to stand a chance if they're going to sit down on their hands and go, oh, we're not going to, I just can't see it happening, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyways, I just think, putting, getting this, kind of in the getting this in the sweet spot on the front end is going to save you a lot of headache.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And again, like going into it, understanding how you want to structure this process and reading the forms and considering different scenarios and being as prepared as possible, because this is new for everybody and we're all kind of gonna make this up as we're going along. So when in doubt, just stick to the forms and the terms in the forms. Just read the documents and go with that. The other thing to remember too, if you are reducing your compensation to match, whatever the seller is offering in that scenario, remember to treat all buyers equally the same. Don't pick and choose who you're going to give leeway to. You should have a standard, like Bill said, for your compensation expectations. I don't tread into any fair housing violations. You really need to be careful with that. Okay. One of the questions that's been coming up is, what if you're working with a buyer between now and the MLS deadline to remove those compensation fields, and you still see commission being offered on the MLS? You should be using these agreements right away. You should have them with all of your buyers that you're working with starting now. Don't wait until these fields are going to disappear, because the sellers on their sellers agents are currently working with the listing agreement that we saw last week that doesn't have anything for compensation for you. So get something in writing now. But what happens? So in that case, if you go under contract, then the offer of compensation on the MLS is still considered valid, even if the rules change the next day. So just know also the CBC form has been removed from the C.A.R library. So if you see it on the MLS, then that's what the compensation is that's being offered. So if it's still on there, and even after the field removal, I know through C.A.R MLS, they're removing that field option for any new listings input after August 13th. So anything that's still in there, or that was in there prior, that has the compensation noted, that will still be visible. So there's going to be this transition period again of like where you're getting the information. So just know you may have to look in multiple areas. Some may have it, some may not. Just have a conversation with the agent. Okay, so it's going to be a weird period, but let's jump ahead to kind of past those deadlines a little bit to what the idea of the new normal will look like when it comes to writing an offer. And it's actually really less intimidating than you might think. First thing you want to do is make sure you check this box on the RPA in section 3G3 of the grid. It's up at the top of page 2, I think. This lets the seller and their agent know that the buyer has an existing agreement to pay their broker, but they want to ask the seller to cover it. And paragraph 18 that it references explains that the seller is entitled to a copy of the written portion of the compensation agreement between buyer and buyer's broker, identifying the compensation to be paid. Not a copy of the whole agreement, but the written portion identifying the compensation to be paid. So that's where you would just give them that last page of the agreement. Now, can you put the amount for compensation up in 3G1 as a seller credit? Yes, but I would not recommend it. First, the default is that the credit goes towards closing costs. So you would then have to check the box, type in other, specify, especially if there's additional credits that like some for the termite and some for broker compensation and so on and so forth. Like that's just another form that everybody has to sign and track. But you can do that. Okay. The other thing, you may run into an issue with limits to credits, limits on credits for the lender, right? Most lenders, and Bill could speak to this or Debbie could speak to this too, are aware of this change and they know not to add the 3G3 term into their calculations, right? But if you're doing a seller credit to buyer, that may again conflict with some of those credit limits with the lender. So just don't reinvent the wheel. Just use the system that's been set up. There is a process designated for asking for the seller to cover the compensation. Just check the box. Checking the box also references this SPBB form, and we'll take a look at that now. This is not a new form. We've talked about this previously, but it has been updated and it's much more simple. There is no math involved. Section 1A has you fill out simply the amount of compensation the buyer wants the seller to pay the buyer's broker. And then 1B lets the seller know it can't be for any more than what's in that written agreement. So don't worry, seller, about being taken advantage of. We're not going to ask you for, that 3% when our agreement is really only for 2. It can't be more than what we already have. That's it. Listing agents look for that box to be checked and this form to come along with the offer and maybe a copy of the last page of the agreement. And that's it. If your offer is accepted, copy of this form goes to escrow along with the rest of the contract and you're done. Escrow will parse out where everybody's commissions go and come from and that's it. So you can see how much front loading and conversations there are being had before you get to just this really simple process of documenting it in an offer and opening escrow. We've been talking all this time about buyers and sellers, but you should also know that there is now a tenant representation and broker compensation agreement available because you would be representing a tenant. And like I mentioned, that you need to have an agreement with anybody that you're representing. So this is available for tenants. It's that same layout, same concept of everything we went over, just with lease terms and lease preferences noted instead of buyer or purchase ones. A few final notes to keep in mind. Again, I've said it before, these changes are not laws. They're simply practice changes, and the NAR settlement that's dictating them isn't even slated for approval until the end of November. So we're doing this now because everybody that has a seat at the table or that has been paying attention understands that this is the direction that we're headed in. Don't resist it. Just get used to it. Start understanding it, learning it. You have to pivot. You have to evolve. Let's just get informed and do this correctly. This will be a bumpy transition. Again, you should expect there to be ambulance chaser attorneys trying to trip you up with these agreements and scared and desperate agents ready to report anyone and everyone for the slightest thing. They're not going to understand these agreements. Everybody's going to be tattling on everybody else for showing their clients these certain properties but they didn't have it written down or they didn't give it in the right time frame. It's going to be crazy. Just document, have a process, and make sure that everything is noted that needs to be noted. If you're unsure of any terms, just read the contracts. Like I said before, These have been drafted by the C.A.R Forms Committee in the most neutral way possible. So there's no need to paraphrase or rewrite things that have already been written for you. If you are one of those stubborn agents that finds change a bit difficult and you want to keep doing things how you're doing them, remember that the C.A.R User Protection Agreement only covers the most recent version of the forms. So don't go and white out old versions of forms and put in your new client's information and terms because that's how you're used to filling things out. Do not use or accept any outdated versions of these forms. And then finally, don't wait to be having these conversations with your clients. Use this as a reason to reach out to them first. Knowledge is power. So feel confident in these forms and everything we covered today, and you guys are going to do great.
Yeah, well
That's all I
said. Lauren, really important information. Thank you so much for going over all this. And so agents, remember these are recorded. And so use these recordings when you are confused. And of course, use Lauren as a resource for you. Right, Lauren?
Yep. Yep. It
All
saves us work on the back end of trying to fix some of this stuff after we've already gone into escrow and and all of that. So
What's the
yeah.
old adage? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of the cure.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, so let's learn this stuff. Let's make sure we take care of these things on the front side, and it's going to save all of us headache and possibly lawsuits. So let's really embrace these new forms, and let's learn them, embrace them, and that way we're all going to be a lot more successful, right?
Yep, that's the plan.
Okay, excellent. Well, again, Lauren, thank you so much for providing this valuable information to our agents. And I think what we'll probably do, since this is such an important topic, is maybe the next 2 weeks we'll do and Bill suggested this as well, maybe we'll do a recap in a shortened version, kind of like some highlights or just a little recap. We've gone through this in great detail, which is incredible, but this is going to be something that we're all going to be kind of struggling with for conceivably a few more months. So let's I think it'll be very, very good for us to come back to this and answer some more questions and all those things. So in the next week or so, please develop questions that you may have regarding these forms. And Lauren, do you think that's a great idea?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Well, in that case, agents, thank you so much for taking the time to go through this stuff with us. And get out there now, and let's make this a great week and a productive week. And we look forward to seeing all of you on next Wednesday's ARG Wednesday webinar. Having a great day.